Any other questions? Jamie, do you want anything?
There's a question.
Question? Okay.
Not a question,
Oh,
Okay.
but I could, willing to fill in a bit.
Okay.
Of info on the Swan.
Perfect.
Harold, can you come up though so that?
Yeah, come on up here, Harold.
Please. Then we can all hear you.
Yeah.
Come up where?
Yeah, because there might be other people.
Yeah, right.
I'll give it a go.
It's just, yeah.
I know we're trying to fill time.
Yeah.
No, we're not. No, we wanted to hear stories.
No, she's lying, Harold. We are trying to fill time. Yeah. Hey.
You know, I certainly appreciate the filling of time. I'm Harold Carlson. The earlier presentation struck one very resounding chord in my mind. Judy and I were privileged last spring to spend a month in Peru. And in part of that trip, we were up in the city of Puno on the Lake Titicaca. And behold, there's a ship that's still floating on that lake that James Watt was involved in designing and building, and it was broken into many small pieces and transported to Lima, and then transported from Lima way up into the Andes and reassembled. And I forget the name of it, but Google it or whatnot, that's certainly interesting. But back to the Swan. Both Judy and I, since we first arrived in Port Alberni, have been involved with the Alberni Valley Outdoor Club. And Al and Jesse Greenhalgh were also very much involved. And there's a bit of the Swan story that I think is okay to share this time. The first attempt at its demise. And I really not knowledgeable about the Swan's earlier history or so forth, but from what we were told or whatnot, the Swan was, as you heard earlier, was utilized in the Sprout Lake, and then towards the end of its useful life or whatnot, whoever was the owner or possessed it asked if he could moor it at the Greenhalgh's property on Faber Road, which that's where it was tied up. And I don't know when or for how long or whatnot, but I do recall Al saying, boy, in the winter and that, when it rained and that, we got tired of bailing it out or whatnot. I guess it was one summer when the family was all fine weather and all together and whatnot. What are we gonna do with that Swan? And they were, I guess, a little bit frustrated with it. We're gonna sink it. So they apparently son and whoever else or what put rocks or boulders on, pushed it out and sank it. And that was the reason for its first demise. But then they did indicate, as they sent art and recovered it later. So.
Okay, thanks, Harold.
Okay.
Peter.
It was given to the Boy Scouts.
Come on up, Peter.
Okay, you can stand up.
Yeah.
Well, when Sylvia retired, and it was given to the Boy Scouts, the second Harrison Scout troop, which Art happened to be the leader of. And it was just too much work for the Scouts to look after, so they moored it, or they took it over and put it on the beach at Greenhalgh's place. And they did get tired of looking after it, so they took it out and gave it a burial. And that's where it was out there, and that's where we found it. And he had I'm not sure if Art had, I think Al had the steering wheel from it. He took that out before he sunk it, just because he was too good to go down with it. But there was a lot of people. Well, Ken was one of the divers that went down, and it took quite a while, but it worked out very well. It was a project of Art's. It was a dream of his to get it functional again, but it wasn't a dream of his wife's. And when Cora passed away, then this kept Art busy for several years. And it was your brother, John Super, that was the guy that was there. He lived over in Qualicum near Art, and he went there every day that Art worked on it and worked with him on it.
Thanks.
And the boiler there
Yeah.
on it was made by people in Port Alberni. All the steel that was welded in it was done by Les Stevens. And that picture of when he showed it on a trailer there with all those pipes on it was copper pipes. I know the guy that bent those.
Now that we sunk it, let's bring it up. Maybe I can call upon Ken Watson. Ken, you've told me some stories about bringing it up, so.
I didn't even put my head in. I feel like I've been press gang.
No, I'm just.
Well, it was 1994 that we raised the Swan off the bottom of the lake, so my mind going back is a bit hazy, but I remember that the main brains behind raising it off the bottom of the lake was a fellow named Kurt Smetcher, who was a doctor in Port Alberni, since moved away, I believe, but he was definitely the in charge guy. I was just a helper diver, and what we saw in the bottom was quite amazing to me. I had seen a lot of wrecks in my diving career, but I never saw one that was completely intact except for the steering wheel. Still had the propeller, still had all the brass fittings, still had, you know, all of those things that you see are scavenged off almost immediately. So obviously no one else had found the Swan in advance of Art and his friends finding it again. And then the question was, how are we going to get it off the bottom of the lake? Kurt took that in hand. I was the pesky engineer asking annoying questions that sometimes might have changed the process a little bit, but Kurt was really the mastermind. It was very silty. The Swan was well nested into the silt, and we had to burrow under a little bit to get slings under the bow and stern, and then we attached some very large carboy-ish, square, cubic things that were from, I think, liberated from industry, paper mill probably. We had a compressor, and they ran some air lines down for us, and so we got the slings under. We got these large cubical items arrayed around the ship, and then filled them up equally so that they would lift evenly. I managed to lift the boat off the bottom in one piece, which there was some question about whether it was going to stay in one piece or break in two. But it did come close to the surface with the way we had slung those original items. And then we had, as somebody said, it was a multi-day event because we couldn't get the gunnels above the water, which meant we couldn't pump it out, as it were. So they brought some additional flotation, which we slung down lower on the vessel and filled those, which we finally managed to get it so that the gunnels were above the water. And then the theory being we'd be able to pump the boat out and it would float, which it didn't. It was leaky. It was very leaky, of course, after its long rest. So they did manage to get it over to the bow ramp in a fashion and get it up onto a trailer. So that's my recollection of the dive expedition. But I know there was a lot of people involved, both under the water and above the water. We had support from, I remember Frank and his boat were there, and Greg Marks, who's now gone, but he was there with his boat and compressor. So we had a lot of people there that day or those days that we did the project of lifting it off the bottom. So.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
All right.
I just wondered about the rocks. Did you take them out before you lifted it?
You know what? I don't recall anything about the rocks. Somebody else might have taken them out, but I wasn't involved with the rocks. So no.
Oh, sure.